With every weakness, there's a strength, okay, tied to it. You might not see it at first, but that's your goal, is to try to find the strength within the weakness. Welcome to 45 on the Hour podcast. I'm your host, Colt 45. And guys, I'm here by myself today. And I want to talk about something that is super controversial to a lot of people. And a lot of people don't like talking about it. But I want to talk about how to work with your weaknesses. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because I think for everybody, everyone's afraid of their weaknesses. Like everyone folds under weakness, right? They go, oh, I got this weakness and I can't let anyone know about it. I can't show it to the world. And I got to just put it down and then just kind of let it be that 20% of me that just sucks, right? Here's the thing. You can't do that. I'll give you a bunch of reasons why. Everyone wants to talk about strengths. But let's be real. Your strengths don't expose you, though, okay? Your weaknesses do. Your weaknesses expose the part of you that you're just not comfortable with, the part of you that just feels like you can't trust telling anyone that, right? Because it makes you vulnerable, right? But your weaknesses are where the cracks come from, okay? That's the cracks in your life, okay? And what happens is you got to fill those cracks with something, okay? And the way that you do that is how you do this, okay? This is what we're going to talk about. When the excuses show up, that's where you break under pressure, okay? And you can't do that. You can't break under pressure. You have to make sure that you stay strong. You can fake your strengths, but your weaknesses, they'll rat you out every single time. See, the thing is I remember growing up having weaknesses about my personal self. I always had weaknesses about my dad. All right. I was always struggling as a man without a father. And I never wanted my mom to see that, you know? I just never did. I always knew that there was like this hidden truth behind, being a man and, trying to be strong for women,? And I grew up with my mom and my sister and, we lived in a mobile home and I was the man of the house at 5 years old, Most people can't say that. Most people say, oh, man, I was the man at the house at, my teenage years or something, this and that, or I had a grandpa around or, someone that was, around that helped, another man that came around. But I didn't have any of that. My mom and my sister literally looked at me from, my younger age as like, hey, you're the dad. You're dad, and your son and your brother. So I had to take on, a role that I wasn't really ready for. So that was a weakness of mine that I wasn't prepared for. But I ended up taking that, and I ran with it. And I was like, all right, well, if I'm going to be the man of the house, then I'm going to be the man of the house. And I remember this one particular time that my mom was dating. Excuse me. I don't even think that I've ever talked about this, but she was dating, and she had a guy come over. And, they were out in the living room, and I was in my bed. And I remember her and him kind of bickering about something. And my mom was saying, you know what, you need to leave. And I remember him saying, but why? And he was like, not listening to her. And I remember getting up, and I was in my Ninja Turtles boxers or briefs, whatever I was wearing. I think I was wearing briefs, like little butt huggers. And I walked out. I had no shirt on. And I remember walking out, and I said, hey, Mom, are you okay? And she said, yeah, I'm all right. But can you ask him to leave, please? And I remember looking at his ass, and I was like a whole, 3'10", 4 foot tall. Like I'm so short. And I just looked at him and I remember I had to like feel, that I was strong. And I felt so weak because I was so much smaller than him. But something came over me and I was like, all right, bro, you're the man of the house. You got to protect your mom. And I remember going, hey, it's time for you to go. And I swear I was just like sitting there in my, my underwear and I just felt it. My energy came off so strong because I just told myself that I had no other choice. And he ended up leaving. He ended up walking out. He didn't ask me anything. He didn't say anything. He just walked out. And I don't know what it was, but that instance, like I remember that because that was embedded in my memory because it was such a deep emotional thing that happened to me because that was where I changed. From that point on, I was a man. So I went from 5, 6 years old, asking for my mom to tuck me into bed, to now you're a man. Now you can't go back now. You can't be a boy anymore because you don't have a choice. And I think that's a big challenge for some of us is just to understand that, like, hey, when you have weaknesses, the best way to get over your weakness is to put yourself in a position where you have no fucking choice but to be strong. So I felt that. I felt that at a young age, and that's where I became a man, around 5 or 6 years old. And I just knew that I was meant for more. I knew that I had to be more. I had to be that strength. I had to be that provider. I had to be that security for my family, and I had no choice at that point. So when we think weakness, I want you to think strength. Weaknesses are cool because weaknesses allow you to be stronger in the moment, okay? Because you have no choice. A lot of our weaknesses we have to be vocal with them. We have to tell people about them. Because the more that you talk about a weakness, the stronger it starts leaning towards a strength, okay? It won't be a weakness forever as long as you vocalize that weakness. When you talk about being weak in some aspect, let's just say you're weak with strength and you struggle with, I don't know. For example, for me, I'm weak on my legs. My legs aren't the strongest thing in the world. I push on them, but my legs are connected to my back, and my back hurts often, right? Because I have back injuries from the Marine Corps and stuff, and I've had surgery. So when I'm putting a lot of weight on my legs, I'm very cautious about it, but my legs are my weakness. So what I do, I work them out 3 times harder because I don't want that weakness anymore, right? I want it to be stronger. So instead of doing heavier weights, I do, lighter reps and more sets. And then I do inner legs, and I do different types of legs, to make my back stronger. So I try to support the weakness with supporting the weakness with another body part that connects the legs, right? So there's always a way around strengthening the weakness, and that's just for the physical part. Now, if you have like a mental weakness, right, towards something, right, let's just say you're afraid of something, right, because of something from the past or whatnot, or something you haven't experienced yet, the best thing to do is to vocalize that fear and tell people about that fear that you have of that weakness. Once you start vocalizing that fear, like I have a fear of this, you start connecting with other people that have the exact same fear. And then what that does for you is that makes you stronger. That makes people more aware of what your weakness is. It makes you more vulnerable. Sometimes the best way to get through a weakness, is to make yourself more vulnerable about that weakness. Now, other people struggle with faith. And that's the last part I want to talk about. Struggling with faith as a weakness, right? That's always been my weakness, but it's always been something that's just been in the back of my mind. I struggled with my faith my entire life. My faith in God, my faith in belief. Is it really there? Is he really alive? Is he really out there? Does he really care for me? And I always had this weakness where I didn't want to be too much into church, but I wanted to believe in God. It was like this weird buffer. And I don't know if you felt the same way, Ghost, or not, but a little bit. For me, I struggle with that, and I've always struggled with that. And I think that's just what the best Christians are made of is, perfectly imperfect people. If you ain't struggling with God, then you're not a believer. I think that if you're struggling, that means you care. Yeah. So, and someone told me that, and it was actually my pastor, Justice. I remember I was listening to something that he was saying, and and he's saying, if you don't struggle with the word, then how do you consider yourself a believer? And I was like, that doesn't make sense. But if I'm struggling, that means that I don't really believe. He's like, no, you want to believe. That's why you struggle, right? And that just goes back to everything I just talked about weaknesses. You want to believe that you have a strength there, but you struggle with it, right? And that means that you're allowed to surpass it eventually. You've given yourself permission because you're struggling with it. So a struggle doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be, bad at that forever. It just means you're bad at it for the moment, or weak at that particular thing for the moment. So, yeah, there's a little background about me. I don't really talk about that all the time. So here's the truth, okay? This is what nobody wants to hear. You'll never outrun your weaknesses, okay? You'll either confront them or they'll hunt you down forever, okay? When I was in the Marines, they didn't just train your strengths, okay? They didn't say, oh, Colt, you're a fast runner, which I was, They said that you're not good enough. at running, right? And you need to work on that. They never gave me full credit for anything. So they would minimize the strength, and then my weaknesses, they would put more strain on that. So for example, I had trouble doing the O course. I had trouble like getting over the walls and shit, believe it or not. And I could do push-ups, I could do all that stuff, but for some reason I had this fear at the top of the wall. And a lot of Marines do. They get to the top and they just freeze up top, and they're like, oh my God, and it's shaking. And I remember getting to the top, no problem, because I had strength, right? But my weakness was just getting my leg over the top. So simple, right? But I struggled with that, man. I freaking struggled. And I remember my drill instructor at the bottom going, what the fuck? It just like in Full Metal Jacket, there's a script. Maybe you could put this in the play, like there's a strip, there's a little clip where this is Lee Ermey. He's the drill instructor. He's like, Private Pyle. He was at the top, and he was struggling at the top. And every time I see that, I'm like, it brings back a memory. And he was yelling at him. He's like, what the fuck, Private Pyle? He's like, get the fuck off my wall. Get the fuck off my wall. He's like, you fat lazy. And he's just calling him all these names, and Pyle's just frozen up. But then eventually, Private Pyle sees something in the future. Something happens. And you got to watch the movie because I'm not going to share it. Something happens to him, and it emotionally changes him. He ends up getting over the O course and getting over the walls. No problem. But he had to overcome something that was in his head. But he ended up turning into a crazy guy. But the point is that sometimes to get over a weakness that you have, you got to put yourself in a position where you have no choice, right? You can't be thinking of the coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? And I think that's where you kind of get into a position with a weakness that you have to know, okay, well, I have this weakness, and I'm struggling with it, right? But I'm just going to go ahead and face it. Here I go. Boom. And you just put yourself into that position, and then you go. For example, like I was at Knott's Berry Farm yesterday, and believe it or not, I developed a syndrome. I can't remember what it's called. Maybe you could look it up, Ghost. But I developed a syndrome where I'm afraid of having something hold me down. So when I was going on rides and they put the lap belt on, if I felt like I couldn't move or it was too tight, it scares me. I don't know if it's claustrophobia, but yeah, it is. That's in like a confined space. I don't know what that's called, but there's something that whatever the syndrome is, maybe you could look it up. I don't know. But when I put the lap belt down, I was in fear that I couldn't get up. So it instantly like makes my heart race. And I got like super scared over the last few amusement parks I've been at. But I just reminded myself what makes me feel good. So the strength in that case was my weakness is that I didn't like that, but I didn't want to lose the moments with my daughters. So I just thought about abundance and love at the moment. And I remember the first ride we went on literally positioned the top of your body, not even just your lap. So it pushes down on your back. It was this ride where you're on a horse and it goes super fast. And there's a thing that goes against your back, and it would push you really hard up against the front of it so that you can't move your upper body. So that made me even more worried. So I put myself in the worst possible position, and it was hot out, and I hadn't been hydrating, and I was like, okay, well, this is a test. If I can do this, I can do anything. So I wanted to face my fear and my weakness because I was with my daughters, and I wanted to make sure that I could go on any ride with them because I'm going to lose moments if I can't get over this syndrome. So I said, okay, this is a positive thing. You got it? Marinthophobia? Marinthophobia. Okay, well, that's what I had.
Fear of being tied up or bound.
Okay.
So I think it's relatable to that, kind of.
Yeah, that makes sense. So marinthophobia, whatever. So I ain't fearing no more. I got over that shit yesterday. So I faced my fear. And I put myself in positions over and over and over and over again. I'm not afraid of scary rides. I'm not afraid of going upside down for drops, whatever. I don't even care. It was literally the thought of like having the lap belt or something on me too tight. So I knew that I would lose moments with my younger daughter and my middle daughter because that's who I was with. And they were telling me, Dad, we want you on this ride. And I'd be like, okay, well, my anxiety might get to me. And they're like, oh, Dad, your anxiety, because they don't understand. So I just put myself in that position. I didn't talk about it. And I talked about something that actually helped me. So, and this is where I want to get into this. With every weakness, there's a strength, okay? Tied to it. You might not see it at first, but that's your goal, is to try to find the strength within the weakness. So for every weakness that I have, my strength has always been abundance and love, right? So what I do is I just would start feeling this overwhelming love for my kids. So when I was getting on this ride, I knew that I was in fear a little bit. My heart was starting to race. I was getting a little nervous, not about the ride itself, but just about being bound by it holding me down really tight, or at least making it so where I'm restricted movement. So I started telling myself, I was like, Colt, you got this, bro. Your kids love you. You're going to be all right. There's been 1 million people on this ride before you. Nothing's happened. Everyone's okay. The ride doesn't stop. And even if it does, you're breathing fine just now. It's not like you can't breathe. So I would tell myself all these things that were true. These are all true statements. And then I would look at my kids and I would say something positive to them. Like, hey, I love you so much. I'm so proud of you. My younger one, it was her first time at an amusement park. And she went on all these rides that she just barely hit 52 inches. So she made it on so many rides that she wasn't able to be on before. So I wanted to share that experience with her. And I went on all these rides. The first ride, I jumped on it. It locked the thing up on me. And I was just looking at her, just telling her how much I loved her. And I was like, I love you so much. I'm so proud of you. She's like, I love you too, Dad. And then instantly all that pain went away. My heart started slowing down. And then it sped up immediately as soon as the ride went. But the whole point of the matter is that I ended up getting through it, right? Because like I said, for every weakness, there's a strength. So I found my strength, and my strength was love and abundance. Anytime I've ever been in fear of a weakness, I've always just stuck to that. It's always carried me through everything. Yeah. Now, I remember also some times in the Marine Corps. And I want to get back into how they never focused on your strengths. They always focused on your weaknesses, okay? Couldn't you run? You ran. Couldn't shoot? You shot all day. Couldn't swim. You got thrown in the pool until you figured it out. Everything they do, they didn't give you a choice, right? They never gave you a choice. They just told you to go do it and figure it the fuck out. That was a Marine Corps slogan. Figure it the fuck out. Like every time they'd give you a task, like they gave us land nav. And they taught us like 3 things, and we're like, okay, well, what about, running an azimuth here? And what if it's dark? They're like, figure it the fuck out. And they'd look away and then walk away. And you'd be like, what? You're going to just drop me off in a helo 20 miles from like the closest anything at 3 a.m. and you want me to figure it out? Exactly. Okay. All right. So that kind of got to me, and that actually made me better. Because anytime I thought about, a weakness, I just thought about, shit, if I get weak at something, I just need to figure it the fuck out. I have no strength. Okay, well, I got to figure out how to get strength. So that kind of like worked for me. But knowing that because you're in combat, your weakness is what gets you or someone else killed. And that was kind of like something that I remember. And I remember them always saying that. Your weaknesses are going to get someone else killed. So you have to work on your weaknesses. And it's the same thing in life. Your weakness is there. Your weakness is where the pressure will hit first, okay? If you're impatient, life will test your patience. If you're undisciplined, life will hand you chaos. If you're insecure, life will expose the insecurity in front of everybody, okay? So make sure that you're not insecure, okay? Make sure you find ways around getting around that. Even if you just have to expose yourself in a position to where you have no choice but to show your insecurity. I like to show my insecurities. I show it online all the time. And the reason why I show my insecurities is because I want people to know what I'm most vulnerable with. Because once it's out of the way, then who gives a fuck? Like what, you want to judge me? You want to judge me? Well, only God can judge me. I know that. The thing is the more authentic you are and the more that you get your insecurities out of the way, the less weaknesses you can overcome, right? You could have a weakness, but if you tell people about the weakness, then it kind of like already breaks the monotony of it. I used to always do this thing where I'd be like talking in public. I've talked in public a few times. And it's one of the hardest things for me, believe it or not, even though I have a podcast. Talking in public in front of people makes me super nervous. And I think it makes a lot of people nervous. The only reason it makes you nervous is because you're afraid to say something that doesn't make sense or people to judge you or not have your thoughts together. So what I would do is I would stand up, and I did this every single time I had a speaking engagement of something. And I would say, hey, guys, how's everybody doing? All right, cool. Hey, my name's Colt Curtis, and I just want you to know that I'm not the best at this, but I'm going to try real hard, okay? I struggle real hard with talking in person, and I just want you guys to know that. And I would say that before every single one. And it sounded weird because it almost sounded like it like dropped me a little bit, almost like they would expect a little bit less from me. And then as I started warming up, I noticed that the crowd was with me and they were all for me. So it was almost like I set the expectation that I was going to fail, even though I knew I wasn't going to fail, just so I felt better in my mind psychologically about pursuing the goal of having a positive speaking engagement. So it's like reverse psychology. So what I always do is when I'm in fear of something, I'll tell people the worst possible thing that could happen, okay? And I would say that in the beginning. I would tell them, hey, this is the worst thing that could possibly happen. And I would almost make a joke of it so that I know in my head that's the worst. So if I'm 1 through 10 and I struggle and I get to a 4, I'm still better than what I told them. So technically I accomplished the mission. So that's always worked for me in that aspect. So if you have a weakness with something, publicly tell people about it. Tell people about it. Make it not such a weakness anymore. Make it one of those things to where people are like, wait a minute, you're saying you have trouble talking, Colt. I said this, people say this to me now. They say, bro, you are freaking great at talking. You should keep doing it. You have a great voice. You know, you sound great. And I love the things that you're doing. For example, yesterday I was at Knott's Berry Farm and this guy literally walked up to me. He said, hey, bro, you're Colt Curtis, right? I was like, yeah. He's like, bro, I follow you, dude. I love your content. I was like, what? This guy is in Buena Park, like an hour and a half from me, you know? I've never met this guy before. And I was like, holy shit, man, that's awesome. He's like, yeah, you don't get a lot of that? And I'm like, no, you're like the first person that's randomly walked up to me and said, I'm Colt Curtis, and he recognized me. And it just, dude, I promise you, I can't make this shit up. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. He's like, yeah, man, I've seen your reels. I've seen your stuff, man. He's like, actually, you've helped me get through my marriage. And, you know, me and my wife are together and stuff. And I was like, hell, dude, that's fucking awesome, man, you know? But I think that, like, what I'm doing didn't really matter, you know, at the time. You know, that was my weakness. I always thought that what I wasn't doing was just not that great. I always thought it was like, okay, I'm just a normal guy, you know, just out here just trying to do something different. But in reality, I'm doing what a lot of people won't. And I'm trying. And I think that's a lot to be said about a weakness. Because if you have a weakness and you're trying to make it better, then it's really not a weakness. It's really not. Because you don't need to call it a weakness. You could just call it something that you're overcoming, right? That's not a weakness. It's just something that you're working on. Everyone's weak at something unless it's work, just like a muscle that's never been touched. A muscle doesn't grow unless you work it out, right? It's the same thing with a weakness. It's only a weakness because you're less educated on it. And you haven't mastered it yet. So technically it's not a weakness. And it's not a strength. So instead of calling it a weakness, call it something else. That's something I started doing with things that I struggled with. I would just tell myself, hey, these are the things that I'm struggling with. But I never said they were weaknesses. I don't like the word weak. In the Marine Corps, we used to always say, weakness is pain leaving the body. And that stuck with me. I was like, weakness is pain leaving the body. I remember when I heard that the first time. I was like, okay, so then it's not weakness then. It's pain. And then say, well, the strength to get through it allows pain, right? And so it's technically not weakness, it's pain. And pain is actually going to turn into strength. So you can just eliminate the word weakness. I remember a drill instructor saying something like that to me, and I was like, all right. So it's just your approach to it and how you see it. Life's a juggle. And I think the closer that we get to understanding our strengths, you know, the closer we get to eliminating all our weaknesses. I think as long as you know what your weaknesses are and you're aware of them, and you vocally tell everybody, I turn all weaknesses into strengths. I know what I'm not as good at. That's what I always say. It's not a weakness. It's just something I'm not as good at. Something I haven't been focusing on enough, right? I struggle with reading. I struggle with understanding things at sometimes, you know, and I even struggle with my pronunciation sometimes. I struggle with putting words together. I struggle with a lot of things. You might not notice it because I don't talk about it. But you might see a strength in so many other things that it heightens everything else to where you don't even notice the weaknesses, right? And I think that when somebody loves you and someone cares about you and someone has so much respect for you, I think that you actually have no weaknesses. I really think so. I think that you could be someone that literally looks like you have no weaknesses. Have you ever been in love with somebody before and you just see nothing wrong with them? think that's kind of like what that means. I think that if you're always focusing on bettering yourself and your strengths are so great, I don't think anyone sees any weaknesses in you, because even the things that are weak to you, they might see as a strength. I think it's just the view on your reality. Me having, maybe not putting my words together 100%. I'm so hard on myself. But maybe the next person that doesn't put their words together as well as I do think that I'm perfect at putting my words together, but I'm just super hard on myself, Or maybe that video that I upload that I didn't think it was that great, goes up to that person that never puts videos up, and they think that, wow, you're a great speaker. You talk well. But in reality, I struggled just to put that reel up. I did 10 takes, just to put it up when they didn't put up one. So I think that also a weakness is something that we carry in our mind as something that we're harder on ourselves on than everyone else is. I don't think that every weakness that you consider a weakness is an actual weakness. I think that someone could look at your weakness that you think is a weakness, but think that you're phenomenal at it. You're phenomenal at everything. You're perfect, because it's how people see you and how they perceive you. So what I want to say is that the more strengths that you have, right? If you have this 20% of weaknesses like we all do, your strengths outweigh your weaknesses. They make them to where they're almost like non-existent. It's almost like finding the love of your life, and they have all this extra baggage that most people would consider baggage, but you love them so much that you're willing to take on the baggage because they're just such a great person. It's such an added value to your life. I've seen that in a lot of things in my time. I've seen that with people. I've seen that with employees. You hire employees and, they got a lot of weight on them. They got a lot of history and, maybe some of the weaknesses that they have, you're a little bit worried about that, but their strengths are just so strong. But it's because they don't allow their weaknesses to be shown or be talked about because they don't care. So I think you have to get to a point to where you recognize your weaknesses, you're vocal about them, but you don't show you show confidence that they don't really matter, And I think that's where we get stronger, Your weakness is where the pressure will hit first in life, okay? It does. If you're impatient, life will test your patience. If you're indisciplined, life will hand you chaos. If you're insecure, life will expose the insecurity in front of everybody. So what do you think? You work with it, not around it, not pretend it's not there. You turn your weakness into a weapon. That's what I do. Can't stay consistent? Build systems so you don't need motivation. Not confident? Put yourself in reps. Public speaking, leading, getting uncomfortable until your voice shakes less. Bad with money, educate yourself, track every dollar, take control before it controls you. Everything that I do that I have a weakness in, you probably see more of it than my actual strengths. I struggle to get up and work out. That's why I do it so much. That's why you see me publicly doing it all the time. I struggle with burpees. My shoulders hurt like crazy. I struggle with speaking, believe it or not. And I do it all the time. I do it publicly. I do it online. I do it here. I struggle with reading. I read every day. I read probably more than my kids do. I know my kids read a lot. Every weakness that I have, I focus on it. I hyper-focus on the weakness because I already know that I'm a smart guy. I know that I can get out of stuff. I know that I can get out of things financially. I can work on myself, and I can make myself better in a lot of ways with my strengths. And I hide my strengths. But the more that I focus on my weaknesses, the better that I get, the stronger that I get. So guys, in closing, your weaknesses will either be your excuse or it'll be your edge. The difference, whether you will face it head on, stop running from your weaknesses, drag them into the light, train them, bleed into them, because one day that very weakness will be the reason someone trusts you. Not because you were perfect, because you fought for every inch. So ask yourself, what weaknesses are you working on today? And what are you doing about it? I challenge you guys, whatever weakness that you have today, take this podcast, share it with your friends, okay? And I want you to tell people as you share this podcast what your weakness is, okay? Name 3. Publicly display those weaknesses. Tell people what those weaknesses are. And I promise you the outcome of that post will be completely different than what you expect. Instead of being criticized, you're probably going to get validated. You're probably going to get people that be like, hey, man, I have the exact same struggle. Oh, my God. The change in something that's hard, okay, or that you struggle with is fixed when you expose and take off your mask and relate to other people. Relating to other human beings is the way that we correct the way that we feel. And that's the way that we change, guys. Change your weaknesses. Help stabilize your weaknesses. Become better at having weaknesses, okay? Embrace the weaknesses. Be thankful that you have weaknesses. Because if you didn't have weaknesses, you'd have nothing to work on. And then what would be life if you were perfect at everything, right? Guys, you guys are all strong. I love you guys. Thank you guys for being there for me. And I'm blessed to be there for you guys. Up until next time, get up, get after it, and get some.
Bitch, don't get too comfortable. Better not get too comfortable. Better not get too comfortable. Yeah, bitch, don't.